Hey, welcome to Abundant Source. In this video, I wanted to talk about the role of caffeine on a raw vegan diet, as far as things like raw cacao and some, vegans and raw vegans are even making exceptions with things like green tea, black tea, coffee, all these things that have caffeine in them. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about caffeine. So first off, I guess I'll just state that there is no function of the body that needs caffeine. Caffeine does not play any sort of role in our biology. There's absolutely no need for caffeine in the human body. The body doesn't use caffeine in a beneficial way. It's actually really an inhibitor for different chemical compounds that are natural in the body. And so that leads to the topic of adenosine, which is a compound in the body which attaches to these adenosine receptor sites in the brain, which is what helps us fall asleep. It causes sleepiness when our brain has been active throughout the day for so long. Then your body will start producing adenosine, and it will attach to these adenosine receptor sites in the brain, helping to induce sleepiness, so that way our brain can rest. That is the natural signal, the natural function that occurs that is supporting a healthy biological activity of the body. These are created when our body needs sleep, and caffeine is actually very similarly identical as a compound in our body, and our body actually uses caffeine to insert caffeine into these receptor sites instead of the adenosine. And when you introduce caffeine into the body, then your body uses caffeine to attach to these receptor sites, which makes it so that way the actual adenosine compound that our body naturally creates cannot attach to these receptor sites, which means that we don't get that signal of being tired when we're really supposed to be having that signal. And the more caffeine you consume, your body will actually create more and more adenosine receptor sites, so that way it can have a chance of getting adenosine into these receptor sites and producing sleepiness. But if you're continuing to consume caffeine, then all these receptor sites get created, and they still are just getting filled with more and more caffeine. And that's why the more caffeine you consume, the more caffeine you need to consume to sustain that feeling of energy that you get from caffeine, because your body needs more and more as it creates more receptor sites. And then that also makes it very hard to come off of caffeine, because now you have all these receptor sites. And if you stop drinking caffeine with all these new receptor sites, then it gets filled up with actual adenosine, and it creates this very intense sleepiness because you have so many receptor sites. And that's why people coming off of coffee feel so sleepy, feel so tired, and have all these headaches and other symptoms. Caffeine is also going to stimulate the production of adrenaline, and it's going to tap into your adrenaline reserves. So it's going to be overworking the adrenals and causing a lot of fatigue in the moments that you are not on caffeine. And so not only are there these adenosine receptor sites in the brain, but there are also adenosine receptor sites in the heart and in the kidney. And so when caffeine starts connecting to those sites in the heart, it actually slows down the rate at which your heart starts pumping blood, and in the kidneys it slows down the rate at which your kidneys are filtering blood. So you're really getting a lot of stagnant blood that's not flowing as smoothly, that's not getting filtered as cleanly because of caffeine. And at the same time, it's releasing adrenaline, which is exhausting your adrenals and also harming your kidneys. Not to mention that caffeine, coffee, cacao, all these things, they're very acidic compounds, very acidic foods, and that's going to cause acidosis in the body. It's going to cause inflammation and swelling. It's It's going to cause dehydration. Caffeine is a total neurotoxin that inhibits the flow of signals throughout your nervous system. It really screws up your nervous system when you consume caffeine. You know, there are certain signals in the body that don't get received because of caffeine, and there's just absolutely no healthful place for caffeine in the body. And there was actually this really interesting study done by NASA with spiders, where they introduced spiders to a host of different drugs and observed how they created their webs. And so here is a little picture of the sort of experiment and how the webs turned out on these different forms of drugs and toxins, or just psychoactive compounds. And you can see that the normal spider web looks great. The ones that are created by these other psychoactive compounds are, I believe, in a lot better shape than the one that's on caffeine, which is just crazy. The ones on all the other compounds at least have like a middle circle starting point, and caffeine is just so messed up. It just kind of shows you the effect of this chemical compound compared to even other compounds which people probably think are crazy and psychologically harmful. And so on a raw food diet, it's super common to be consuming cacao, for sure. And even raw cacao has caffeine in it. And caffeine is a toxin to biological life. And it's found in things like coffee and cacao, because the coffee and the cacao that we think of and that we consume is actually the seed of a fruit. Coffee is a fruit, cacao is a fruit, and what we think of as chocolate and as coffee is actually the seed, which is really supposed to be, you know, planted and turning into another fruit tree, so that way we can eat the fruit, which is the healthy part. You know, coffee is a healthy, delicious tasting fruit. And so the seeds of these fruits really aren't meant to be eaten by human beings. And I really love the way that Dr. Doug Graham puts coffee into perspective when you think about it. He says something like, you know, you're taking the seed of a fruit and you're basically roasting it into charcoal, and then you're grinding that charcoal up, and then taking its ashes and pouring perfectly good water into a filter, and then basically drinking that sludge that you've just created. And I just love the way that he puts that. That's basically what coffee is. We're drinking the charcoal ashes of the seed of a fruit. And although you can get, you know, raw cacao, and so it's not really going through that whole process. Most chocolate does go through a similar process, but if you're eating raw cacao, you know, it's a little bit better, but it's still got the caffeine. It's still a seed that is not meant to be eaten by the human body. And it's still gonna have crazy effects. I haven't eaten cacao in probably around 7 or 8 months since I've been in Hawaii. And I just remember consuming cacao in Hawaii. I still didn't consume it very much. And so every time I did, just have like a little square of raw cacao, the effects on my body were crazy. Just crazy jitters, crazy stimulation, like uncomfortable. I couldn't control my body, and it just felt really weird. My nervous system felt weird. I noticed that caffeine really does affect my kidneys. And that was a huge thing when I was drinking coffee. It was like my kidney was so inflamed every time I drank coffee, and it was sending weird signals throughout my nervous system. I would get like weird twitches in my neck, and it'd be painful. And it's just so acidic, so acidic. You're creating so much acidosis in the cells of your body, which is toxifying your blood, toxifying your lymph system, toxifying your liver, your kidneys, the things that are supposed to be filtering and cleansing. All this are, you know, just being overworked. So I highly suggest trying to get yourself off of any caffeine. It is highly addictive, and I'd say that if you are drinking coffee, a good idea is to maybe try to wean yourself off with some green tea or black tea for a while, maybe a month or so. And then after your body feels like it's used to that amount of caffeine, then you can sort of wean yourself off of the caffeinated green tea with things like herbal teas that have no caffeine. That way you're still getting that sort of mental pleasant satisfaction of drinking, herbal tea, and having still that nice warm feeling from that habit that you've created, but without the caffeine there. Coffee and chocolate were definitely the hardest things for me to give up. Again, caffeine is just so addicting, and caffeine also basically inhibits the reabsorption of dopamine into your system. So basically, you've got all this dopamine that is sitting, being active, and it's not going anywhere. So you're like, yeah, you feel high, you feel so good, because you've got all this dopamine that is not getting reabsorbed and not getting released from the receptors that they're activating. And so it's just kind of all this dopamine sitting there, which is very stimulating, not good. And that's also why caffeine is super addicting, is because it gives you that super amazing dopamine rush that just sits there. It's a hard substance to get yourself off of it, but once you do get yourself off of it, you'll just notice how much more stable and sturdy your lifestyle is, how much more stable your energy is, and how it just feels much more controllable, and like you just don't need it anymore. I love how Ted Carr emphasizes a lot how you only feel like you need something because you use it. You only feel like you need caffeine because you use caffeine. You only feel like you need cooked food because you consume cooked food. But if you get off of it long enough, then you won't feel the need for it anymore, and you'll actually feel a lot better in yourself once you get off of it. So I hope that that was informative for you and inspiring for you to get yourself off of all caffeine. It really plays no part in the human system. And I hope you're doing wonderful, and I'll talk with you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.